Welcome, kind soul. You've reached a quiet place, where time slows, and the stars begin to whisper. Let the day fade, and rest settle gently around you. We begin with a story about silence, starlight, and the first note of a forgotten song. The Star Singer of the Silken Sky. There was a sky far above the world, not the one of birds and clouds and stormlight, but another, older sky, one woven from threads of night, stretched across the vault of time, and stitched with stars like beads of breathless silver. This was the silken sky, and it shimmered not because of suns or science, but because it had always listened to music. And it was that music, a melody sung once each evening by the chosen star singer, that made the constellations stir. The stars, it was said, did not shine on their own. They waited. Waited for the hum of that sacred voice to ripple through the threads, to call them into their slow, elegant motion. Like dancers waiting for the first note of a waltz, they would not begin until the song did. But now, they stood still. Unmoving. Unlit. For the first time in 1,000 years, the sky had remained quiet. No voice had risen. No note had rung through the loom of the heavens. The star singer, the new one, newly chosen, newly cloaked in silver and silence, had forgotten her first note. She sat now, alone, on the high stone balcony of the echoing tower, where the sky was closest and the stars hung just above her head like sleeping fruit. Her hands trembled in her lap, clasped tightly. The robe she wore was too large, the silver threads too heavy. She had practiced for years, but never on a real night. Never when it mattered. The scroll with the notes lay beside her, untouched. But the first note, the true note, was never written down. It had to come from the heart, felt, not found. She searched for it in her chest, in her breath, in the hush behind her thoughts. But it was gone. And the stars waited. And the world below, sensing the stillness above, quieted too. Far above the tower, beyond the velvet dark, the sky waited, not empty, but woven. It had always been a tapestry, though few ever knew, not flat, but full, threaded with memory, meaning, and soft-spun time. At its center was the looming tree, hidden deep within the sky's weave. Its roots clung to nothing, floating gently in space, curling through strands of night, drinking the ink of dreams. From its branches hung spools of starlight. And around it fluttered creatures not born of earth, tiny, weightless things made of echo and glimmer, who tended the sky's cloth, mended small tears, and listened to the voice of the singer. But now, the looming tree was still. The threads had slackened. The moths no longer moved. In the echoing tower, the star singer curled her fingers around a pendant she wore, a small stone, soft and blue as sleep. It had belonged to the previous singer, her teacher, her friend. A voice like a sigh, like velvet in winter. She had passed it on with a smile and a whisper, "The sky will remember you. Just listen." But now, in the silence, it was the star singer who had forgotten. Down below, the villages flickered with their hearth fires. People stepped outside their cottages, looked upward, and furrowed their brows. The stars were there, but not lit. Not moving. As if trapped in glass. And though none of them knew quite why, a strange hush fell over the earth that night. Clocks ticked slower. Winds softened. Even dreams came with more care. And in the tower, the girl, only 17, though chosen by ancient song, felt a tear slip down her cheek. She had trained so long, but not for this. Not for the silence of failing. And so she did not sing. And the stars did not move. And the sky waited. The next morning came without color. Dawn, usually a slow swirl of pink and pearl, arrived as a pale wash, like watered milk spilled across the horizon. The birds sang, but timidly. Even they, who knew nothing of towers or singers or stars, felt that something was missing, something just beyond their reach. The star singer remained on the balcony, where the marble was cool beneath her feet, and the silence clung to her shoulders like a shawl of fog. She had not slept. She had not tried again. She feared that if she sang, and the stars did not stir, the truth would become too loud. That she had failed. That the sky had chosen wrong. That some voices are not meant to rise. She pressed the blue pendant to her lips, and thought of the old singer once more, how she would walk with hands clasped behind her back, humming lightly, her voice always brushing against silence, never needing to fight it. "You are not singing to the stars," she had once said, "you are singing with them." And yet now, they made no sound. The new singer closed her eyes and pressed her fingers against her throat. She tried to hum, just softly, just to herself. But all that came out was a breath, the shape of a note, empty. The scroll beside her still lay unopened. But perhaps the note she'd lost wasn't on it anyway. Perhaps it had never been. Beneath the tower, deep within the mountain's bones, ancient gears and glimmering stones waited for the song that would turn them. The world was built around music, most had forgotten this, but the tower had not. Nor had the sky. But sometimes, even the stars forget how to sing, until reminded. It was just past the hush of noon, when the sky dimmed slightly and shadows stretched long and thin, that a visitor came. Not by horse, nor by foot, but by flutter. A soft flurry of wings, thousands, perhaps, moved in slow spirals up the tower's long winding stair, each motion stirring a whisper of dust, a ripple of magic, a breath of old memory. The girl looked up, startled, but only gently. She rose and walked inside, toward the sound, toward the golden shimmer that floated through the air like candlelight made of wings. And then she saw her. The Moth Keeper. No one knew where she lived. Or if she truly did. She simply arrived where needed, cloaked in velvet so dark it shone, her hair silver as frost, and her arms always full of tiny glowing creatures. The star singer bowed her head instinctively. The Moth Keeper offered her no words, not at first. Instead, she lifted her cupped hands. Nestled within them was a single moth, pale as parchment, with specks of starlight along its back, and eyes like glass beads. It pulsed softly, as if breathing in slow motion. "She's lost her note," the Moth Keeper said, her voice like wine through dry grass. "And so, the stars have lost their place." The girl blinked. "I've tried," she whispered. But the first note, it's gone. The moth keeper nodded. Then we must find where it drifted. And just like that, softly, with no ceremony, no magic flares, no great winds, the moth rose into the air and began to flutter toward the spiral stairs, its wings barely moving, yet carrying purpose. The girl followed. Downward, into the belly of the tower. Into memory, and perhaps, back into song. The stairs spiraled downward with no end in sight, stone worn smooth by centuries of sols, lit only by the flutter glow of the moth. Its wings pulsed faintly with warmth, brushing the walls as it led the way, weaving a path as if it knew exactly where to go. The star singer followed in silence, her fingers trailing along the curve of the wall, each step echoing like a question. Down they went, past old alcoves with broken harps and dusty chimes, past murals of constellations long since fallen from memory. This was the part of the tower that no one spoke of, where sound lived quietly, long after it had been made. The Hall of Forgotten Notes. The moth keeper said nothing, only paused now and then, placing her ear gently to the stone. When at last they reached the bottom, they stepped into a round chamber with no ceiling, open to the sky, though the stars were faint above, still hesitant, still waiting. Around them, carved into the stone walls, were faint markings, musical symbols, lines, dots, curves, like handwriting passed down by dreams. The air felt thicker here, as though it held too many unspoken songs. The moth came to rest on a pedestal at the room's center, its glow spreading like ink in water. And then, very faintly, a hum. The star singer turned. A tone, thin and wavering, rose from the walls, as if the chamber itself were singing to her. No words. Just sound. Old sound. Lost sound. Each wall held echoes of songs never sung, or sung and forgotten, unfinished melodies, abandoned lullabies, misremembered hymns. They drifted like perfume through the air. This is where forgotten notes come to rest, the moth keeper said, her voice scarcely above the hush. And sometimes, to be remembered. The star singer stepped toward the pedestal. She did not try to sing. She simply listened. The pedestal was made of smooth, black stone, cool to the touch, though it shimmered faintly like morning frost. The moth rested quietly atop it, its wings slowly folding and unfolding, like the rise and fall of a sleeping breath. As the girl stood close, she felt something stir beneath her skin, not pain, not fear, but recognition. As if the silence around her was whispering a name she had forgotten belonged to her. There were no instruments here. No scrolls, no notes to read. Only air, memory, and the press of unseen threads brushing softly against her heart. And then, a question rose, not spoken, not heard, but felt. Who were you before the silence? The star singer closed her eyes. She thought of her training, yes, but that was all discipline, repetition, structure. She thought of her teacher, her voice, the pendant. She thought of standing in front of mirrors, humming until her tone was perfect, but none of that felt like her first note. That wasn't the voice the stars were waiting for. She sank to her knees beside the pedestal and let her breath slow. thought less, felt more. And slowly, a memory rose, not of a lesson, or a rehearsal, but of a night long ago. She had been 9. Lying in a field alone. The stars had looked close enough to touch, and she'd sung to them, not for anyone else. Not to impress. Just to feel them. A soft song. Wordless. Like humming the warmth of a summer night. She hadn't even known what she was doing then. But the stars had shimmered in reply. She opened her mouth. No melody came. Not yet. But a breath did, steady, certain, like the air before rain. And the moth glowed a little brighter. The moth keeper, standing just behind her, spoke quietly. Your voice isn't lost. It's waiting. Beneath the weight of trying. And then, she offered something new. A spool of silver thread. Take this, she whispered. And weave your way back to where it began. The thread glowed faintly in her palm, no thicker than a strand of hair, yet it shimmered like a stream of stars caught in a current. It pulsed, ever so softly, like something alive, like something listening. The star singer cradled the spool and looked up toward the open sky. The stars above remained still, dim, uncertain, as if watching with held breath. But within her hand, the thread began to stir. It unwound, slowly, tracing a line across the floor, and then up the curved wall of the chamber, disappearing into a crack just wide enough for light to slip through. The moth keeper gave a single nod. It will lead you, she said, voice as soft as settling dust. But it will not pull you. You must follow with care, and with patience. The thread drifted ahead, curling like smoke down a hidden passage that had not been there before. The star singer stepped forward. The passage was narrow at first, walls close, as if the stone had only just remembered it could move. But with each step, the air changed. Grew warmer. Older. Brighter, though there were no torches, no lamps. Only the glow of the thread ahead, and the calm rhythm of her breath. She passed through rooms no one had walked in for centuries, rooms filled with celestial maps, half-sung songs, and shelves where ancient tuning forks hummed so faintly they could only be felt, not heard. The silver thread wound through them all. And with each step, she felt something loosening inside her, not breaking, not falling apart, but softening. The need to prove dissolved. The need to perfect faded. And somewhere between one breath and the next, she began to hum, not loud, not full, just enough for her voice to curl around a thread like ivy around a branch. It didn't sound like training. It sounded like her. At last, the thread led her into a vast chamber where the air shimmered like still water and the walls curved into a perfect dome. No windows. No doors. Only a high, wide ceiling that mimicked the sky, but not today's sky. No. This one was different. It showed memories of stars, stars that had long gone quiet. Constellations once known by the ancients, now lost to story and shadow. Shapes of animals, stories, songs, whole lives danced in light above her, as if painted across the heavens by invisible hands. The silver thread stopped at the center of the room, coiling into a slow spiral upon the floor, and then, quietly, vanished. She stood alone now, though the air around her was full. She took another breath. Then another. And finally, she sang. Not a full song. Not a grand one. But a thread of sound, pulled from memory, from breath, from the core of her being. Just a note, long and clear, fragile, perhaps, but true. And something happened. One by one, the stars above her stirred. They didn't flare. Didn't shine. Just shimmered, like waking eyes. The constellations shifted, slow, reverent, like dancers taking position after a long pause. The dome echoed with her voice, once, then twice, then again, as if time folded in on itself and her note repeated through every version of her that had ever existed. The chamber became a sea of sound. And in the reflection of the sky, she saw herself not as a singer meant to lead the stars, but as one small part of their great, slow waltz. She did not need to guide them. She needed only to sing with sincerity. To remember that stillness is not failure, but sometimes, the beginning. The music faded, but the echo remained, soft and slow, like ripples after a stone has kissed the surface of a still pond. The stars in the dome pulsed gently, in time with her breath. No one clapped. No one cheered. There was no audience here, only the sky. And yet, something had shifted. The room around her dimmed, the constellations above retreating once more into the high curve of the dome. Not vanishing, just resting. As if saying, yes. This is enough. The star singer stood quietly, the final hum of her note vibrating in her bones. She felt no glory, no grand release, only a settling. Like dust falling into place. Like the soft click of something that had waited so long to be understood. The silver thread did not return. But it had done its work. And now, she could find her way without it. As she turned back through the quiet corridors, the once forgotten rooms now seemed familiar, gentle, kind. Not empty, but full of listening. Full of waiting. And as she ascended the winding stair once more, each step lighter than the last, she knew something the silence had never told her before. That sometimes, the sky isn't waiting for sound. Sometimes, it's waiting for truth. The wind was waiting. It stirred as she reached the top of the echoing tower, sweeping around her in a soft hush of night's breath. The sky was open again above her, deep, indigo, and full of stars, but still unmoving, still dim, still listening. She stepped onto the balcony with quiet feet. This time, she brought no scroll. No robe. No formal pose. Only herself, and the small, blue pendant resting warm against her chest. She looked upward. The stars no longer felt like distant lights. They felt near. Not above her, but around her, like companions, like old friends who had been watching all along, simply waiting for her to stop trying to impress them. She sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor and breathed. No performance. Just presence. And from her lips, a note, clear and simple, rose into the air. It curved and lifted, wavered slightly, then steadied, and the wind caught it, carried it, danced with it. And then, the stars stirred. Not all at once. Not like fire. But slowly, sweetly, like petals opening after a long frost. First one shimmered. Then another. Then a cluster, blinking awake. The great river of light above began to curl, just a little, as if stretching after a long slumber. The constellations found their places. The rhythm returned. But more than that, the stillness had meaning now. It had shape. It had voice. And the star singer, seated in the hush, smiled, not with victory, but with peace. The stars now turned in their old, slow way, not rushing, never urgent. They spun like thoughts drifting through dreams, graceful in their stillness. The sky above the tower glowed faintly, not with brightness, but with presence. The star singer remained seated, the final note long since sung. There was no need to continue. The voice had done its work, and now, silence could speak. The moth keeper stood quietly nearby. She did not offer praise. She did not nod. She only opened her hands, releasing the last of her glowing companions into the night. They rose like tiny lanterns, winged and warm, joining the stars in their slow dance. And then, gently, the moth keeper said, "Now you understand." The girl did not reply with words. She only looked up at the sky, not as something she must command, not as a stage for her voice, but as a partner. A mirror. A breath. She stood slowly. And in that moment, something deeper stirred, not in the stars, but in herself. She realized the sky had never truly stopped moving. It had only paused, to see if she would keep chasing perfection, or if she would choose truth instead. The sky hadn't been waiting for a singer. It had been waiting for her to remember. And now that she had, it could begin again. The next evening, across the world, the people lifted their eyes once more. Children pointed. Elders whispered. Artists held their breath. Farmers paused in their fields. The stars were moving again. Gently. Slowly. But unmistakably. And the strange hush that had fallen over the world, the one no one could quite name, began to lift. But the star singer did not take credit. There was no ceremony. No proclamation. She remained in the tower, not as a figure to be watched, but simply, as someone who listened. Each night, she stepped onto the balcony, and if the note came, she sang it. If it did not, she waited. And the stars, now knowing the rhythm of patience, waited too. The sky did not demand beauty. It asked for honesty. And in time, the people below began to feel it in themselves. That they, too, were allowed to pause. To forget. To begin again, not for others, but for the quiet joy of returning to what had always lived within. And so the singer sang. Sometimes loud, sometimes soft, sometimes barely at all. But always true. And in the stillness that followed, something invisible always bloomed, a sense that no note is ever truly lost, only waiting to be heard again. Somewhere, in a breath, in a pause, in the hush between stars. The sky grows quieter now, the world dimmer, softer. Let your breath follow the breeze. This is a tale of stillness and memory, of a feather that leads not upward, but inward. The last feather of the cloudbird. It began, like many quiet wonders do, with something small and soft. A feather, white as morning mist and nearly weightless, drifted down from a sky without clouds. It spiraled, slowly, gently, as if uncertain whether it meant to fall, or float forever. No one saw it descend. No wind stirred it. No bird had flown overhead. And yet, there it was, nestled in the mossy garden of an old dream-gatherer, who was just then stepping barefoot among the lavender, her basket filled with herbs that whispered secrets to sleeping minds. She paused, brow furrowed softly, as her eyes found the thing resting at her feet. The feather glowed faintly, not with light, but with presence. It shimmered with something remembered, like a song heard long ago and forgotten for just as long. She knelt, reached out, touched it. And the moment her fingers brushed its edge, cool as dew, the air around her stilled. Time slowed, just slightly. The bees quieted. The flowers turned, almost imperceptibly, toward the feather instead of the sun. The dream-gatherer blinked. Then, slowly, smiled. She did not speak. There was no one to speak to. But her heart knew what her lips did not need to say. The cloudbird had passed again. And it had left behind a feather, its last, perhaps, or perhaps only its next. It had been nearly 100 years since the last one had fallen. The dream-gatherer placed the feather gently into her satchel, folding it between soft cloth and sprigs of sleep mint. It did not resist. It seemed content to rest, though not for long. For feathers of the cloudbird were never meant to stay still. They were filled with motion, even when motionless, like a breath held just before a sigh, or the sky before it chooses to rain. She returned to her cottage, a place of crooked eaves and wind chimes made from hollow bones of fallen branches, and placed the feather on a low table beside her kettle. She made tea, as she always did when the air shifted. But something in her shifted, too. As the steam curled upward, so too did the feather rise. Only slightly. It floated half an inch above the wood, turning slowly, as if it were listening. She sat down. Sipped. Watched. And knew. It was time. Time not just to see where it would lead, but to follow it. Because cloudbird feathers, once found, always pointed towards something that needed remembering, not just in the world, but in the heart. She would leave at dawn. Not to chase the sky, but to walk gently in its shadow. To follow the quiet pull of a feather that had waited so long to be noticed. And as she sipped her tea, she felt it again, that shift in the air. Not louder. Not brighter. Not colder. Just different. The kind of change that only those who listen carefully would ever feel. And she had always been a very careful listener. At dawn, The sky was hushed, wrapped in soft gray, neither bright nor dim, but something in between. The kind of light that made everything seem older, like an echo of a memory rather than the moment itself. The dream gatherer rose early, as she always did, and dressed without hurry. A cloak of muted green, woven with moss thread. Boots kissed by rivers. A satchel of tea leaves, quiet scrolls, and one feather that hummed without sound. She stepped beyond her garden gate, and the feather lifted faintly, like a compass needle turning, not to north, but to something older than direction. It pointed toward the hills, where the trees grew twisted and slow, and the air always smelled like something waiting to be told. As she walked, the wind met her, not in gusts, not in song, but in names. It brushed her cheeks with syllables of people long gone, murmured along the folds of her cloak with memories not quite hers, and wrapped itself around her like a soft shawl of once wers and might bess. The dream gatherer did not flinch. She simply nodded. She had heard the wind speak before, but never quite like this. It was remembering her. And it was guiding her. For the Cloudbird, it was said, did not simply drop feathers. It left invitations. And the wind, its oldest friend, carried those invitations with care. The path led deeper into the quiet wood, where time didn't move straight, and stones sometimes whispered if you paused long enough to listen. And so, she paused often. By midday, the forest thickened. Light came only in soft pieces, slipping through leaves like honey through a sieve. Every tree here leaned slightly, as though caught in the act of bowing, or listening. Their bark curled in spirals. Their roots cradled stones like sleeping thoughts. The dream gatherer stopped at the heart of this place, a clearing where no birds sang, where even insects moved with reverence. In its center stood a circle of ancient trees, all hollow, all open like fluted instruments carved by wind and time. She stepped into the ring. The feather, which had been resting in her hand, lifted again. Spun once. Then slowly, fell. Not to the ground, but into the air, into the center of the clearing, where it remained, suspended. The trees, in answer, began to hum. Not loudly. Not like music. It was more like a deep breath, taken by the forest itself. The kind of breath one takes before saying something important. The hum grew, trembling through the earth, vibrating in the soles of her boots, whispering through the threads of her cloak. It wasn't frightening. It was familiar. As though the woods had been waiting for someone who knew how to listen properly. And then, from the center of the hum, a single phrase drifted into her mind, not from outside, but from within, as if it had always been there. You must return what remembers the sky to what once dreamed of falling. The dream gatherer opened her eyes wide. The feather pulsed once in the air, then stilled. And she understood, though she could not explain it, not in words, not yet. Only that the feather did not belong to her, and that it had somewhere to go. Somewhere far above. Or far within. The dream gatherer did not speak as she left the grove. Words would have felt too heavy in that place. Instead, she walked with care, her boots brushing gently against moss and loam, the feather once more floating just ahead of her like a guide, a whisper, a pull. The trees thinned. The sky grew wider. And ahead, where forest gave way to misty highland, something unusual came into view. A bridge. But not one made from wood or stone. It shimmered, pale and shifting, as though it had been braided from wind and fog and forgotten songs. It hung between two high ridges, arching gracefully across a gorge that pulsed with deep, slow light. The kind of light that felt rather than shone. The dream gatherer stood at its edge, and the feather hovered beside her. She placed one foot upon the bridge. It held. Not solid, no. It swayed, breathed, but it supported her, as though each step was accepted in trust, not weight. And as she crossed, she began to hear voices. Not near. Not loud. Just, everywhere. Not words. Not yet. Just tones. Notes. The breath of the sky. She realized, slowly, that the bridge itself was woven from the songs of the wind, the ones too soft for ears, but not for hearts. And it sang, now, as she crossed. A lullaby for the wanderer. A welcome to the one who had heard the feather fall. Beyond the bridge, the path vanished. No road. No trail. Only a vast, rippling field of golden grass, so tall it reached her waist and swayed even though the air was still. The feather darted ahead, leaving a trail through the stalks like a single, curling thread of silver. She followed, step by step, her hand grazing the tops of the grass, which trembled as if it remembered her. The field was quiet, but not empty. There was a weight here. Not sadness, not fear. Something older. A sense of time. As if each blade of grass marked a moment once lived, and the field itself had grown from hours no longer needed, hours that had passed unnoticed, unmarked, unloved. She stopped for a moment, closed her eyes, and listened. And she heard them. The hours. The ones people left behind. The ones rushed through. Forgotten. Traded for urgency. They lived here now, whispering among the golden stalks, saying, I was the morning you didn't greet. I was the afternoon you hurried past. I was the moment you wished away. And yet, they did not sound bitter. Only soft. Only hopeful, still. As if they were grateful, at last, to be remembered. The dream gatherer placed her hand on her chest, feeling the steady rhythm of her own hour, her own breath. I remember you, she whispered. And the grass around her bowed. Just slightly. As if thanking her. The field ended not with a line, but a slow unfurling, golden grass thinning into mossy stone, as though the land itself were taking a deep breath. Ahead, the ground began to rise, gentle and round, a hill cloaked in velvet green. The feather hovered near its base, then slowly drifted upward, spiraling as it climbed. The dream gatherer followed, feeling the hush deepen with every step. The air grew cool. Not cold, but clearer, like water from a forgotten well. And the hill seemed to listen. At its crest, she found a hollow, no larger than a room, with walls not of earth or bark, but glass. Not the kind made by flame. This glass shimmered like moonlight caught in a raindrop. It curved in on itself, circular, perfect, and when she looked into it, she did not see herself. She saw the sky. But not the sky above. This one shimmered with endless layers, each a moment in time, each a different truth. The constellations were different here. The stars pulsed with other names, older songs, softer meanings. The glass had become a mirror of sky memories. The dream gatherer stood in its light. And slowly, the feather floated to its center. It did not land. It did not speak. But it began to glow, faintly, sweetly. And in its glow, the sky in the mirror blinked. Once. Then stilled. And in that blink, she felt something stir in her. A thought not quite formed. A memory not quite hers. A whisper, not all things lost are meant to return, some are meant to be carried forward. As she stood before the mirrored hill, the light around her began to shift, not brighter, but deeper, as though it carried weight rather than warmth. And then, the wind rose. Not a breeze. Not a gust. But something vast. A movement not through the air, but of the air itself. The feather trembled in place, and every tree, every stone, every blade of grass below the hill seemed to lean upward, listening. And then, a shadow passed over the hill. Soft. Slow. Endless. She didn't see wings, not fully. She saw only the trace of them, like the memory of something vast. A ripple in the sky. A hush in the heart. The Cloudbird had returned. Or perhaps, had never truly left. She did not fall to her knees. She did not cry out. She simply closed her eyes, and felt it. The sheer presence. The knowledge that something so large, so old, so quiet, had come not to be praised, but to be heard. The Cloudbird, it was said, only appeared to those who remembered how to listen without seeking. Who carried dreams not as burdens, but as bridges. And here she stood, no longer following the feather, but standing with it. The great shadow passed once, then again, and then slowly, settled overhead, like a sky made of breath and sleep. The feather floated higher. And for the first time, it began to fall upward. Upward it rose, not with speed, not with urgency, but with the grace of something returning to where it had always belonged. The feather shimmered as it floated, casting soft light, not outward, but inward, into the heart, the breath, the bones. The dream gatherer stood in perfect stillness. She did not reach. She did not follow. She simply watched. The Cloudbird's presence circled above, not seen fully, but felt, like the way one feels the sun through closed eyes, or hears a lullaby long after it has ended. The mirrored hill below glowed faintly, reflecting a sky not above them, but within them. And then, the feather vanished. No flash. No sound. Just, gone. Returned. As if it had never fallen at all. The dream gatherer closed her eyes. not in loss, but in peace. The wind quieted. The light dimmed, not into darkness, but into softness. A hush fell across the hill, the field, the bridge, the trees, as though the world had taken a long breath and was now holding it gently in its hands. The dream-gatherer remained still for a long time. She did not turn to go. Not yet. There was something being gathered here. Not items. Not words. But meaning. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that settles, like dust in golden light. She thought of all the forgotten hours in the field. The names whispered by the wind. The hill that mirrored the sky's oldest self. And she realized. The journey hadn't been about returning the feather. It had been about becoming the one who could carry it. Because feathers of the cloudbird are not burdens. They are invitations. To move gently. To listen deeply. To remember that not all silence is emptiness. Some silence is presence. When she turned to go, the way was different. Not unfamiliar, just new. The land had shifted. Where once there was only meadow and moss, now there was a narrow path, winding between dreaming trees and soft, humming stone. The world had changed. Or perhaps, she had. She followed the path without question, and it led her past everything she had already passed, but now seen through different eyes. The grove now hummed a different note. The bridge shimmered in a deeper hue. And the grass in the field did not whisper forgotten hours anymore, it whispered gratitude. As she walked, she did not look back. Not out of pride. But because there was no longer anything to return to. The journey had planted something in her, a knowing that would grow, not loudly, not quickly, but surely. Like roots in sleep. Like stars behind clouds. And she walked slowly, softly, as though each step added another stitch to the very sky. Back in her garden, days later, though time no longer seemed to measure in hours, she brewed her tea in silence. The wind curled along the windowsill like a cat in thought. The kettle sang. And there, beside the teacup, where once the feather had rested, there was nothing. And yet, everything. For something remained in her breath, her step, her stillness. The feather had returned to the sky. But its imprint had woven itself into her being. She no longer needed it to guide her. Because the part of her that had followed it had always known the way. And now, she sang softly as she worked. Not a song for others. Not a song for show. But a song the wind could carry. A quiet melody for the cloudbird, who still circled high above, invisible to most, waiting for the next soul to listen when the feather falls again. And far above her, the sky shimmered gently. Not brighter. Not louder. Just, truer. Now, a final hush. A garden waits where forgotten wishes glow, and moths carry what we no longer say aloud. Step gently into the quiet of the glass garden of the wishing moths. There was a moth, pale, glowing, quiet as breath, who fluttered alone beneath a sky that held too many stars. She was not ordinary. Her wings were made of woven shimmer, her body soft as silver dust, and her flight left behind a faint trail of light, like stardust curling through shadows. She did not fly toward flames. She flew toward wishes, not the ones shouted on birthdays or written in notebooks, but the ones barely thought, the ones whispered and forgotten in passing. And tonight, she had chosen someone. He was walking home under the hush of late autumn dusk, scarf loose, eyes low, thoughts too full. The kind of soul who carried tiredness like a satchel, worn but never set down. He did not speak. He did not smile. But something in him was still listening. And the moth saw that. She fluttered once, twice, then drifted down toward him like a falling petal. At first, he didn't notice. But when her light passed near his hand, a warmth spread through his palm. He stopped, looked, and saw the moth land, ever so lightly, on his sleeve. She shimmered. He blinked. And then, she rose again, slow and glowing, drifting forward into the night air. He followed. Not quickly. Not with questions. Just, with quiet. And so began his journey, not toward answers, but toward a place even his forgotten wishes remembered. The moth floated through winding streets that blurred into one another, softening at the edges as the night deepened. Streetlights blinked slower. Windows glowed dimmer. Time itself seemed to breathe, and then hold that breath. He followed her past a crooked bookshop, past a bakery where flowers still danced in the air, past a tree whose branches hummed without wind. Then she turned. And there, tucked between a cracked wall and an alley grown over with ivy, was a door. It hadn't been there yesterday. It was made of glass, frosted, filigreed with vines etched in silver. No handle. No bell. Just a small plaque, resting quietly in the shadows. Glass garden. Wishes welcomed. He stepped closer. The moth brushed the door with her wings. It opened with no sound. Beyond it, darkness. But not the kind that frightened. The kind that waited. He looked once behind him. The street was gone. Not lost. Just, folded away. The moth drifted through the doorway. He followed. And the door closed behind him like a sigh. The garden waited beyond. And somewhere inside, every forgotten wish he'd ever made, began to glow. The first thing he noticed was the quiet. Not silence. No. This was something gentler, a hush, full and round, like the space between the last note of a lullaby and the breath that follows. The second thing was the glow. It came not from lamps, nor torches, nor stars. The light here floated, soft orbs no larger than fireflies, resting on glass petals, clinging to crystal leaves. The whole garden shimmered faintly, as though dusted in dreams that never quite settled. Every tree was transparent. Every vine, every flower, every blade of grass, crafted not from bark or root, but from glass. Clear, colored, milky, mirrored. Some pieces curved like frozen rain, others like spun sugar. Yet nothing was sharp. No danger lingered here. And in the air, moths. Hundreds of them. Some so small they could perch on a teardrop. Others large enough to cast wide, slow-moving shadows on the garden floor. Their wings pulsed with a light not their own, but borrowed from wishes. He stepped carefully onto a path made of round, glass stones, each one etched with curling script he could not read. As his foot met the first, it chimed softly, like a bell made of memory. He turned, but the door was no longer behind him. Only the path. Only the light. Only the moth, fluttering gently, waiting. And so, he walked on. The path curled like a ribbon, weaving between towering glass lilies and fern fronds that rustled when he passed, though there was no wind. And then he saw them. The blossoms. Not flowers, not quite. They looked like glass lanterns, but they bloomed like roses, layered, glowing, and held open with delicate silver filaments that cradled small, sleeping lights. Each one glowed in a different hue, blue, amber, violet, pale green, and within each, a moth. Sleeping. Wrapped in wings that shimmered faintly, curled like parchment around the fragile flame of a wish. He paused beside one, an amber blossom with soft spirals. Inside, the moth twitched slightly, as if dreaming. A plaque rested beside it, low to the ground, half sunken in mossed glass. I wish I'd said yes. He moved to another. I wish I hadn't rushed that day. Another. I wish I could remember why I stopped singing. Each blossom held a wish too soft to shout. Too small to be held in the world for long. So the garden had taken them. Had let them bloom. Had let them rest. He closed his eyes. He could not remember his own wishes, not fully. Only scraps. Only fragments. But he felt them begin to stir, deep in the chest, just below the ribs. And the moth, the one made of moonlight, drifted forward now. Brushed her wings against a blossom not yet opened. It shivered. Then slowly, it began to bloom. And inside it, something glowed softly, something familiar. A wish of his own. Not remembered. Not forgotten. Just, waiting. The blossom before him, round, pale, almost translucent, shivered again beneath the brush of the moonlight moth's wings. It wasn't large, nor brightly colored. No sweeping curves, no glistening pattern. It looked ordinary, if anything in the glass garden could be called such. But it hummed. Low, steady, like something breathing just below awareness. And then, it opened. Its petals, thin as morning fog, unfurled one by one, each making a soft chime as they touched the air. At its center lay a moth, but not sleeping. This one was awake. Its wings pulsed with a soft gray light, like the space between rain clouds and starlight, and in its eyes, there was something deeper than glow. There was recognition. He took a slow step forward. This was his wish. Not remembered in words. Not neatly filed. It had never been written, never spoken aloud. But it had lived in him, in quiet hours, in far-off glances, in the way he lingered before sleep and never quite knew why. It was the wish that had no name. The kind that forms beneath weariness, not hope. The kind that grows not from longing, but from quiet ache. The moth lifted from the blossom. And as it rose, something stirred inside him. A memory. Not of a moment, but of a feeling. Sitting alone on a balcony at 17, wind pressing against his back, knowing he should go back inside, but wishing, without knowing why, to stay just 5 minutes longer. Not to think. Not to act. Just to be. To belong to the moment without having to do anything within it. That had been the wish. He didn't need to name it now. The moth already knew. And it fluttered close, brushing against his cheek. The warmth it left behind was not warmth at all. It was peace. A sound stirred behind him, soft as pages turning. He turned. And there she stood. The keeper. She wore robes that shimmered like rain on glass. Her hair was dark, long, and threaded with bits of broken crystal. Not sharp. Not cruel. Just beautiful in its imperfection. Moths danced around her, brushing her shoulders, curling in her wake. Her eyes met his, but she did not speak at first. She only smiled. The kind of smile one gives not to greet, but to welcome something home. She looked at the moth hovering near his shoulder. Nodded once. "You carried it long," she said, voice soft as old paper. He blinked. "I don't even remember making it." "You don't need to. Wishes like that are not made once. They're made often. Every time you looked out a window and didn't know why your chest ached. Every time you paused, but moved anyway. Every time the world asked for more than you had, and you gave it, quietly." He felt something in his throat tighten, but not painfully. Like tears that came not from sadness, but relief. The keeper stepped closer. "These moths," she said, lifting her hand, "find what we do not say. They wait. And when we're ready to see what we once left behind, they show us." She turned slightly, and the garden around them seemed to stretch, row upon row of blossoms, glowing quietly in the dark. "Not every wish is meant to come true," she said gently. "Some are meant to be honored. Not granted. Not fixed. Just known." She gestured to the glowing blossom that had once held his moth. "This one is yours. It bloomed because you came. And now, it will stay open. A part of you remains here." He felt no need to speak. The silence was speaking for him. And above, more moths drifted down, drawn to him, not in hunger, but in kinship. As if recognizing someone who had learned how to listen. The keeper moved through the garden without disturbing a single bloom. Her steps were so still, they seemed to belong to the place, as if the path had grown around her rather than beneath her feet. He followed, his breath calm, the ache in his chest not gone, but no longer alone. They passed blossoms of every color, and now he noticed something more. Each one had a mood. Some glowed with joy, bubbling, warm, like laughter remembered. Others pulsed slowly, gently sorrowful, but not heavy. Not dark. Just tender. Like a memory someone had learned to love even though it once hurt. And then, the keeper stopped. Before them stood a blossom, small, delicate, glass petals soft as breath. It pulsed with a quiet blue light, and within it, a moth rested, not curled, not asleep, but waiting. This one, the keeper said, her voice lower now, does not belong to you. He nodded. But it has waited a long time, she added, turning to him. And you are the first one to come near it without fear. He stepped forward slowly, unsure why the words moved him so. And as he approached, he felt it. The sorrow. Not sharp. Not weeping. But soft. So soft. A sorrow that had become gentle through time. The plaque beside the blossom read only, "I wish I had stayed a little longer." He did not ask whose wish it was. Somehow, he already knew. He had felt that same feeling once. Standing in doorways, on train platforms, at the end of 2 brief visits. The ache of parting too soon. Of leaving something just before it turned into something more. He sat down beside the blossom. And he stayed. Longer than he thought he would. Not to fix it. Just to honor it. And the moth inside fluttered once, as if to say, "Thank you." Night deepened, though no stars could be seen beyond the garden's glass canopy. And yet, it did not feel dark. The shadows here were gentle, soft-edged, drowsy. Like the pause before sleep, when the world is still breathing, but no longer watching. The keeper knelt beside him. "Most people don't stay here long," she said quietly. "They touch what they need to, then drift back to the waking world. But you are not quite ready to leave, are you?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He looked at the blossom before him, then to the glowing paths behind. He thought of the moth that had awakened when he approached. Of the ache in his chest that didn't want to go back to its cage. And then he whispered, barely a breath. "I didn't know how much of me had gone quiet." The keeper smiled, not with pity, but with understanding. "It happens," she said. "Especially to kind souls who keep giving themselves away. Piece by piece. Task by task. Until the world is full of sound, and they forget their own." He looked up. "Is that what this garden is for?" She tilted her head. "No," she said. "This garden doesn't do anything. It only holds. It holds the wishes that were left behind. The parts of us we thought we didn't have time to carry. The truths we buried because they didn't fit into busy days." He breathed in deeply. And he realized something. This place wasn't meant to change him. It simply let him remember what he hadn't known he'd lost. And that remembering, gentle, quiet, without demand, was beginning to bloom in him, too. The keeper rose. The moths around her stirred, their wings casting glimmers across the garden's floor like scattered thoughts trying to return to their source. "There is one path left," she said softly, and it only appears when a soul no longer asks where it leads. He turned to look. But there was nothing. Just more blossoms, more drifting lights, more hush. And then, a shimmer. A ripple. Like breath on glass. And where there had been stillness, a trail unfolded, not in stone, nor steps, but in presence. A path made of light. Not bright. Not loud. It glowed faintly beneath his feet as he stood. Each step forward summoned the next. No markings. No names. Only direction. Gentle and sure. He looked to the keeper. She did not follow. "This is yours," she said. He hesitated. Not from fear. But from fullness. "I don't know what I'll find," he murmured. She nodded. "You're not meant to. You're meant to walk, and listen." The moth, the same one who had led him here, fluttered ahead, her wings now the softest hue of morning light, as if she'd gathered color from the garden itself. He followed. And behind him, the blossoms stayed lit. Not to mourn his leaving, but to honor the steps he had taken. The path led into a glade where no glass grew, no moths drifted. Only grass now, soft and silver. And sky, wide, open, and clouded with stars that looked close enough to taste. At the center of the glade stood a tree. It was not made of wood. It was not made of glass. It was made of memory. Each branch held not leaves, but tiny folded scraps of light. Wishes. Paper thin. Glowing faintly. They moved in the breeze like breath held between moments. The moth circled once around the tree, then landed gently on his shoulder. He stepped forward. And the tree whispered. Not in words, but in reminders. He remembered the time he watched light dance on water and wished he could bottle that peace. He remembered a moment, just before sleep, when his thoughts had quieted long enough to wonder what silence might say, if it were given the chance. He remembered the boy he used to be, the one who once believed magic might live in moths and mirrors. Each memory brushed past him like the softest hand. Not accusing. Not correcting. Just being. And then, just as he placed his hand to the tree's trunk, it pulsed. And one folded wish, tucked among the branches, slowly unfurled. Not old. Not forgotten. But new. A wish he hadn't yet made. A wish that was forming now. He read it. And he smiled. Because it didn't say what he wanted. It said, I will stay awake to my own quiet. The glade held its breath. Around him, the stars shimmered quietly in their high cradle of sky, and the tree of memory stood aglow, every folded light now stirring gently, as if the wish he had read had rippled across them all. The moth on his shoulder rested. She did not move. Because she no longer needed to lead. He sat beneath the tree, cross-legged on the silver grass, and placed his palms flat to the earth. It was warm, not in temperature, but in spirit. Like placing one's hands upon the back of an old friend, knowing no words need be spoken. From the distance, the path of light dimmed, not vanishing, but resting. And the garden. The garden knew. It did not celebrate. It did not weep. It only welcomed. In his chest, he felt no rush to return. No pull of time. Only the quiet ache of having found something he didn't know he'd lost. And the deep relief of not needing to chase it anymore. The moths around the garden had begun to gather in the trees, their wings folded, their lights soft and steady. He realized then. Some people came to the garden to remember. Others came to remain. Not forever. Not to escape. But to become part of what helps others find their way. And as the wind stirred softly through the grass, he understood. The moth who had led him here had once been led herself. And now it was his turn. In the weeks that followed, though time did not pass in the garden as it did elsewhere, the keeper would sometimes pause in her walk. Not to call. Not to search. Just to listen. And she would smile. For the glass paths shimmered slightly brighter now. The blossoms bloomed with gentler light. And the garden had begun to hum a new note. One evening, soft, still, and silver with mist, a girl found the glass door. She had wandered far, her hands full of too many unfinished things. Her eyes quiet, her voice long tucked away. She paused before the frosted vines etched into the frame. She did not knock. The door opened. And there, in the doorway, waiting, was a moth. Pale, glowing, and quiet as breath. It hovered just once. Then turned. And the girl, who hadn't remembered how to hope, followed. Not quickly. Not with questions. Just, with quiet. And deep within the garden, a new blossom began to stir.